today, and our producer in the booth here, Elena Rodriguez, dealing with a little bout of laryngitis. So please say a little prayer for her that she recovers and gets better quickly, and we can get a lot of work out of her. That's the objective here. Let's get work out of Elena and get her working hard to spread the kingdom through radio. So anyway, so I'm here to take your questions today as usual, and let me take an email here while we're waiting for the callers, but let me give you the call numbers. I guess that'll help. 1-800-585-9396, 800-585-9396. And if you're outside North America, country code 1 and then 205-271-2985, 205-271-2985. Of course, we are on Facebook and YouTube as well, and you can even send a text message by texting EWTN at 55000 and then wait for a response from our social media team, Jeff Burson, and then text back your first name and the question, and then we can take that on the air. So you can do that by texting EWTN at 55000. Wait for a response from us, and then you'll come back with your first name and your question. So let me take an email here while we're waiting for calls and questions and texts. Mike says, your church incorrectly teaches that your bishops are successors to the apostles. Really? The signs of an apostle are casting out demons, speaking in tongues, taking up serpents and would not be harmed, drinking deadly things and no harm would come to them, lay hands on the sick and the sick would recover. None of which is associated with your bishops today. How can you possibly say that your bishops are apostles since they do not have the signs of a true apostle? Mike. Well, I think you've mistaken the signs for the essence of a thing. A sign is a witness. Christ did what is often called the 7 signs in the Gospel of John, the 7 great miracles that he did, just as indications of who he was, signs of who he was. Signs of the Eucharist in the multiplication of the loaves and fishes, of course. Signs of power over demons, power over nature, and so on. And so that's what signs do. And obviously in the early church there were an abundance of signs, and there's no shortage of signs today in terms of miraculous healings and cures and so on. But that's not the essence of the apostolic office any more than it's the essence of being holy and being a saint in the church. The apostles are those who are the witnesses to the resurrection, and this was a unique office. It doesn't exist in exactly that way in the church anymore. It existed because certain individuals, the apostles, the 12, minus Judas, of course, and then St. Matthias by election and St. Paul by the choice of Christ himself, 13 as it were, imitating the 13 tribes of Israel that took the place of the original 12, with Joseph giving his 2 shares to his sons. So we have these apostles, and they are the ones whom Christ appeared to after the resurrection, and they are officially saying to the world, we walked with Christ, we saw Christ, we heard Christ, we saw him die, we saw him after he rose from the dead. They are the witnesses of that. Now, they chose other men to carry on their mission, to be witnesses as well, but they're no longer the first-hand witnesses the way the apostles were. And so that is the main task of the apostles, and they appointed bishops such as Timothy and Titus, was 2 that Paul appointed. We have in the writings of St. Irenaeus of Lyon from the 2nd century, we have the list of all of the bishops in the See of Rome, those who followed after St. Peter, Linus, Clement, Sistus, Cornelius, and a number of others, and down to St. Irenaeus' day. So we have the record of the witnessing to the resurrection, and the church continues the witnessing to the resurrection. Not only the bishops through their official teaching, but also the all those who assist them, the priests, and also the faithful, the baptized, who witness to their faith in the resurrection and to their belief in the resurrection. And as to surviving deadly things, I would say that the apostles have survived deadly things, because although many of them, indeed, of the 12, all but John was a martyr, it can certainly be said that the Apostolic Church has survived all of these things down through the centuries. The demons, the many little antichrists that have arisen to suppress the church and destroy the witness to the gospel. The serpents, human and demonic, as it were, that seek to harm the church. So there are no shortage of the miraculous signs in the survival of the church, especially during times of persecution. Well, let's see. I think we should have time here for one other email before the break. Kevin from Texas asks, how can we promote in a practical sense and introduce the devotion and the practice of reparation to the youth of the church today? This is a great question, because in this year of Fatima, one of the things Our Lady asked for was reparation. The angel in the vision, we're about to have the 13th apparition, the one of July, with the secret in 3 parts. That great vision that was revealed in the year 2000 at the Beatification Mass, with the angel with the flaming sword saying, penance, penance, penance. Well, Our Lady and the angel that appeared to the children of Fatima told us how we can practice reparation. And it's really quite simple. We were taught prayers, but we were taught also how to teach this, to practice it through not only saying the prayers, but just simply have the intention to make offerings of our daily sufferings in reparation. Now, this is a concept, I think, that is not that difficult to children to understand. They usually have a keen sense of justice. I certainly notice that with my little ones. You take a toy, that's mine. That's an act of justice. They're claiming what is their due. They want what is theirs. Maybe lacks a little bit of charity, but nonetheless they know the justice element of it. And reparation is nothing but justice. We have offended God, or others have offended God. Yes, the Lord stepped down from heaven in order to redeem us, but we also must try to make reparation, to make our contribution, to cease sinning. That's the first way, but also to help others cease sinning. And that's what Our Lady asked of us. So I think if you can explain to young people the message of Fatima, you can explain to them the justice of making reparation to our Lord and Our Lady for the sins of the human race, and not just obviously because they are offense against God, but this is a way to sort of mitigate the punishment that is due to injustice, again, to the sinners themselves, to give a response to that other part of that vision of the 13th of July, the vision of hell, where poor sinners go, who do not make that reparation and see no need of reparation in this life. So I think there are very simple ways, beginning with the message of Fatima, beginning with the example of the little children who are, after all, were 6 and 7 and 10 years old, and yet were able to understand and comprehend the message as delivered them to by Our Lady. And we can pass that message on from Our Lady to our own little ones today and to youth in general. Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll go to Robert in Springfield, Ohio, and we'll take your question as well. If you'll just pick up the phone and call us at 1-800-585-9396, 1-800-585-9396. Back in a moment after this quick break.
It's the start of a new day for Morning Catholic Radio.
And Gloria keeps Mother Angelica's perpetual calendar handy.
Where most men work for degrees after their names, we work for one before our names, Saint. It's a much more difficult degree to attain. It takes a lifetime, and you don't get your diploma until you're dead.
That may be my favorite quote from Mother Angelica.
Morning Glory, Catholic from the start. Weekday mornings, 7 Eastern on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
EWTN Religious Catalog is your online destination for Catholic books, DVDs, rosaries, devotionals, and every purchase directly supports EWTN's mission. Ready to shop? Visit EWTNRC.com today.
Dr. Ray Guarendi.
Psychological correctness is ruining parents. What is psychological correctness? It's the idea that says if you just say the right words with the right logic, using the right reinforcement schedule, and implementing the right I message, Melody will say, "Oh, Mother, I've just been so blind. Of course, I see parenting as you describe it." Psychological correctness is a quagmire. It leads to analysis paralysis, overthinking, overanalyzing, overtalking, under-enjoying. Psychological correctness essentially makes parents search for the appropriate ways to do it. Better to ask, how well is this working in my family, with my children, and my morals?
Hi, this is Anna Mitchell, host of the Sunrise Morning Show.
This is Jeanette DeMello, host of Register Radio.
This is Doug Keck, EWTN President and Chief Operating Officer. Thanks for listening to the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
Well, we're back, and let's take our first caller. We have Robert in Springfield, Ohio, listening on the EWTN app. Good afternoon, Robert.
Hello. I had a question about something that I had seen on a video that an atheist individual was using as justification for why Christianity is,
okay,
as he said. Mm-hmm. It was basically about the origin of the Judeo-Christian God. I believe Dr. Anders may have mentioned part of it toward the end of his show, but essentially what he was saying, and I haven't had time to look at this for myself, and frankly I'd prefer the Catholic viewpoint anyway. Anyhow, the God currently comes from ancient, basically an amalgamation of ancient gods. I don't know if I say it right, but Baal, Mashira, I can't remember if that's what it is. I don't have it in front of me now. And Yahweh. And Yahweh was a war god. One was a fertility goddess, and so on and so forth. And eventually, through time, I don't remember who it was, but there was some ancient leader who essentially was like, okay, well, Yahweh seems to get people going, and it took factors of different pagan gods and made it into this Yahweh, and that's kind of where we're at today. And I just didn't know about the veracity of that and wanted to talk to you about it.
Well, the veracity of that is that what you have is obviously people who don't believe in the God of Revelation, that are sort of cobbling together little bits and parts of history, which may have some truth in terms of the circumstances of human beings and their beliefs on earth, but nothing of the truth about God as he is and as he ultimately revealed himself, beginning with Abraham. Of course, he'd revealed himself in the garden to Adam and Eve. So, sure, if you look at the Middle Eastern situation before the time of Abraham and afterwards, of course, as we certainly saw in the books of Kings and so on, where the relations with the Israelites, the Canaanites, the Philistines, and so on are recounted, we can see that there was a multiplicity of gods in the culture around them. Of course, the pantheon of Egypt, of Rome, and Greece, these are well known, and typically those pantheons grew from time to time as they absorbed other cultures and they added their distinctive gods to their pantheon. We see this even in the Acts of the Apostles, where St. Paul tells us, in speaking to the Athenians, he says that I see you have an altar to the unknown God. This was basically the Greeks sort of covering all bets, just in case there was some God that they didn't know about. They wanted to make sure that they were They were showing some respect to him and not getting on his bad side, if you will. But as it turned out, it served Paul's apologetic purposes very well, because it showed that in the human heart there is this inkling for more and more and more. And if you add up the totality of all of the pantheons of gods, they're nothing more than anthropomorphisms. In other words, human beings looking in the mirror at themselves, seeing their flaws, and painting them on the gods, and it sort of justifies human nature as it is. But what we have in the sacred scriptures is an entirely different picture. Now, it is certainly true when you take the names of God, like, for instance, the Elohim is a name for gods. The God of Israel can go by El. He can go by El Shaddai, the most powerful. Obviously, Yahweh, the divine name. But that name actually, as a philosopher will tell you, and was certainly only fully respected, acknowledged, and even discovered, as it were, in the Christian era, this is a metaphysical statement about God. He is the source of all being. I am who am. In other words, He is that being who is existent, who is self-existent. The rest of us are beings who are dependent upon that being. So this was a profound revelation that sat in the revelation guarded by the Jewish people from the time of Moses down to the Christian era, when Christian philosophers looking at the nature of God comprehended and understood his true nature. I am who am. I am the self-existing one. So the idea of God certainly has evolved within cultures, even in the culture of Israel. At first, they distinguished God from all the other gods because the other gods were false and God was true. Their God was true, not because he was their God, although human beings being what we are, we sort of typically, he's our God, he's not yours. He's on our side, he's not yours. Even during our world wars, we've had both sides claiming God was on their side. That's a human weakness to do that. No. And so Israel naturally had certain elements of that. He was their God. He was fighting for them. He was defending them. And you see that in their response to God. But we have to look at what God himself has revealed about himself. That he is the author of creation. We see that in the book of Genesis. He is the author of the redemption, as we see that in the New Testament. He is the one who sends his Spirit in order to share his divine life, his life of holiness with us. We also see that in the New Testament. So, yes, an anthropologist can, looking at the landscape of human cultures over the millennia, can say all kinds of things and make all kinds of conclusions regarding, the Jews only took this, or the Israelites rather took this God, and these other people took this God, and the Muslims took that God, and dividing it up that way. But that's not really what Scripture tells us. It's certainly not what either the Jewish people or the Christian people believe about God and his nature, and who he is and who we are in relationship to him. That's what counts. And I think you can't take an anthropological view, because that's essentially what the pagan nations did. They took a purely human and purely horizontal view of God, in which God was the one who tolerated their defects, because the gods themselves were full of defects, of anger and lust and wine drinking and all of these things. And that justified to them the kinds of moral faults that they themselves had. We are this God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Father of Jesus Christ, and the God of both Jews and Christians. He's a God of holiness, a God who calls us to be like him and be with him for eternity. It's it's an entirely transcendent view of God, well and far above that of the pagan nations. Well, let's take another caller. Let's go to Chris in Columbia, Missouri, listening on Sirius XM 130. Good afternoon, Chris.
How are you guys today?
Pretty good. What's your question on this fine day?
I would like to first say thank you for your show. Very informative, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to ask you this question. So my brother and I were both born Catholic. He has become since Evangelical Baptist, and I am Catholic, and we were having a discussion yesterday at lunch. Both of our parents have passed away, and I said I had felt the need to pray for them, and his reply was, well, why? They're dead. And in bringing up Lazarus, not being able to change, his fate after having passed, his point was that, once you're dead, you're basically your die has been cast. You're either going to heaven or to hell. Of course, he doesn't believe in purgatory either, but I didn't have any.
Sure,
I didn't have anything.
sure.
I wanted to say something, but I didn't know how to.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to say. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we would agree with him totally. It's appointed to man to die once, and after which the judgment, according to the letter of the Hebrews. There is only one judgment. There is no reincarnation by which we work out karma in every generation until we're finally purified. But it has this essential reality associated with that idea, as wrong as it is, and that is everybody who has died, are they pure? Are they whole? Wholly and completely committed to God? I would say even most Christians, that's not true. That we recognize that we have many faults. Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, "Be perfect as the Father is perfect." So here are our options. If we die and we're not perfect as the Father is perfect, what does Jesus say to our judge, if he is our judge? He said, well, I said that, but I didn't really mean it. You're not perfect. You're going to hell. No, he doesn't say that. He says, you're a good person, but you're not perfect person. You need some purification. And the person says, thank you, Lord. I don't want to enter into the kingdom until all the smudges and dirt and everything that clings to me from my life in the world has been washed away. And they happily go to that place of purification called purgatory. So it makes sense. Not only is this idea of justice revealed in Scripture, we're in multiple places, such as in the Sermon on the Mount and others as well. The idea of, for instance, Revelation 21, we're speaking of the heavenly Jerusalem. Nothing impure will enter in. That's another way of saying, be perfect as the Father is perfect. Does your brother believe that even though he may believe he is saved, as I do, in the sense that I am in justice, in the state of grace, if I were to die, I would go to heaven. That's what I believe. Do I believe I can lose that by offending God, by hating Him, by opposing Him? Absolutely. And I don't know what your brother or evangelicals generally believe about that. I think some believe you can fall from that, others that you can't. But that's sort of immaterial. Are they perfect? Are they absolutely pure? So that when they die, Jesus will say, you're perfect as the Father is perfect. He doesn't say, I'm perfect and I've imputed you to be perfect. He says, you're perfect as the Father is perfect, because that's what He asked us to be. And then if we are, we fulfill the what we're told by John in the book of Revelation. We have nothing impure in us, and we can enter into the heavenly Jerusalem. So where is the great middle group of people who are neither absolutely perfect, but are also not the enemies of God, are not dying outside of His grace and pleasure? That's most people. That may include your parents. I don't know. Might not include you. They may have gone straight. They may have been exceedingly holy people. This is, in the church we have canonizations for a reason, to point to people and say, if you imitate this disciple of Christ, you will be a good disciple of Christ yourself. So for all of us in the middle, you might say, between saints and the reprobated, there is purgatory. And that's why we pray for our dead, and that's why we don't assume they're canonized at the moment of death. Well, When we come back from this long break, we're going to take some more calls. We have Barbara and Chris and Joseph waiting on the line. We'll take their calls when we come back from the break.
Jerry Usher.
I'm really a revert. There are a lot of converts on Catholic radio, a lot of reverts, those who have come back to the faith. Well, I would describe myself as a revert, and ever since I came back to a practice of my faith, I started praying the rosary, going to even daily Mass, God has led me on an amazing journey and used me in a lot of incredible ways that I never dreamed would have been possible.
Take Two with Jerry and Debbie, Monday through Saturday, noon Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Hello, this is Brian Kemper of Priests for Life with Pro-Life Update. This coming weekend, the church celebrates the Feast of Corpus Christi. We worship the God who gives us his very body and blood. An early Christian symbol of Jesus was the pelican, because of the legend that the mother pelican wounded herself to feed her children with her own blood. You can still see this on some altars. This makes us think at the same time of the Eucharist and of the relationship between a mother and her unborn child, who is nourished in the most intimate way by nutrients carried in the mother's blood. Jesus gives himself to us daily on the altars of our churches so that we can give ourselves to our children, born and unborn, daily on the altars of our lives. This is Brian Kemper on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Welcome to EWTN's Catholic Almanac.
It's June 16th. St. Pio of Pietrelcina was canonized on this day in 2002. Pope John Paul II said Padre Pio was a generous dispenser of God's divine mercy because he always made himself available for confession. Also on this day in 1972, Pope Paul VI approved a statement on general absolution. General absolution can only be given under extreme circumstances, usually when danger of death exists.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
And we're back, and take a YouTube question. Raymond on YouTube asks, are the patriarchs of the Old Testament considered saints? Have they ever been canonized? That's a good question. As a matter of fact, in the book which the Holy See, which the Vatican publishes, which constitutes the list of the martyrs and saints at any particular time, and there's several thousands, as you can imagine, after 20 centuries, it actually lists some Old Testament individuals, such as King David, the prophets like Elijah and Elisha, Adam and Eve, our first parents, and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, on the supposition that they are indeed with God. And that's what a saint is. A saint is somebody that is holy, and all those who die who are holy are saints, even if they're not canonized. So they've not been formally canonized if they're from the Old Testament, but there are certainly many witnesses for Abraham. It was attributed to him. Justice was attributed to him because he believed in God. So this is the Holy Spirit telling us that Abraham was a just man, and so on the basis of that, we can think of him as a saint. He is with God. He is in heaven. We also have in the book of Revelation, it's quite unclear that who the 24 elders are with any certainty, but there is the tradition that they represent the 12 patriarchs of the old law and the 12 apostles of the new, as representing all of the, you might say, the paternal leaders of Judaism or of Israel and of the church down through the centuries, the saints of the old law and the saints of the new. So, no, there are individuals such as that, and even from the early church, the Blessed Virgin Mary, the apostles have never been canonized. They've been acclaimed throughout the church's history as saints. And in a similar way, the saints of the Old Law are acclaimed by the church also as being with God, and so no canonization was really necessary. Well, let's go to Joseph in Melbourne, Florida, listening on Divine Mercy Radio. Good afternoon, Joseph.
Good afternoon. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
It's an issue I have with the word existence of God. The issue is I know that everything that exists is limited. Everything that exists is imperfect. And everything that exists owes that existence to some other being. So I would argue that, yes, I do exist, you exist, because I'm limited, I'm imperfect, and I owe my existence to other beings. Why do we use the same word to say God exists when we know God is not limited, God is perfect, God doesn't owe his existence to anybody?
Well, we say exactly that, of course. And here's how we do it. Philosophers, and here we're talking about, you could also talk about Aristotle, not a Christian, not a believer, but yet he arrived at the idea that for all of, and necessarily creatures are imperfect in that they are limited, they are finite, even if they're morally perfect. So if you make a distinction between perfection of being and perfection of will, say of morality, even a morally perfect being who is a creature is finite. And I think this is the point that you're making. And philosophers resolve this because we say that we have a participated being. In other words, when God said to Moses, as I mentioned to a previous caller, I am who am, he is saying he is the fountain of all existence. Not only does he contain himself infinite, eternal existence, he is the source of all that is. And every other creature, everything that he creates has contingent being. It's contingent on him, or participated being. It participates in an act of his power, sustaining it in existence. In fact, we say that in philosophy and theology, that not only did God create us, but he sustains us in every moment of our existence. So much so that if he withdrew that sustenance, which he never would, if he withdrew it, it isn't that we would suddenly become a lump of dust on the ground. We would suddenly simply not be anything, and everything that is us would be nothing. We would go back to the nothing from which he created everything that is not himself. So this is sort of the dance, if you will, that philosophy and theology has come to consider, the very question which I think you rightly pose. How do we distinguish between our own finite creaturely existence and the existence of God? We do it by analogy, that what we have is participation, an analogy to that which is real, and the real is God. This is basically what Aristotle said 2,350 years ago, and it's what realist philosophers like Aquinas and all others down to our day also will say. So when we use the word perfect with regard to human beings, we're going to be talking about their moral perfection, that even the best of us will die with some moral imperfection, as I was telling the previous caller, and that has to be purified. I like to sometimes compare it to a compass. You know, it's the common thing in the church to speak of Christ as the East, the Orient, the sun rising, the light of the world, and all of those analogies and metaphors and similes that are used with respect to the Son of God coming into the world. And so if we think of those who are wholly imperfect, it's going west. The compass is turned around. But which of us can say that we are perfect? In other words, we're totally going east. I think most of us are maybe drifting a little northeast or north by northeast or south by southeast or maybe even, a little bit further over there, 170 degrees, almost going west but not quite. And so represents our moral imperfection. Our being is perfect in the sense that God created it, He sustains it, and therefore His action is always going to be good. And that's why Catholics always say being is good, as the book of Genesis does in the first chapter. He said it, and it was good. And so being is always good, but it's a participated being, it's a contingent being, it's sustained by God Himself. But the real goodness, the real truth, the real is, if you will, that's God. And that's the way we always have to think of it. Otherwise, we get too big for our britches and we start thinking that we're God, that we can call that which is good evil and that which is evil good. And sadly, this is the direction our world is heading in today. So I don't know if that brought some light in the situation for you, Joseph.
Yes, it does. In that case, can we just say God is instead of saying God exists?
You can say God is.
Okay.
But we do. Existence is a way of speaking of His being. If you just say God is, that's His being. Being is. A very good equivalency there. If we break it down, we can talk about His nature or essence, and we can talk about His existence. Those are basically mental, logical categories by which we can speak about God who is. So that's a very good point, Joseph. Thanks for your call.
Much.
Well, let's go to another caller, and let's go to Barbara in Georgia, listening on Sirius XM 130.
Hi, Colin. How are you today?
I'm very good. What's your question today?
My question, I'll give you a very brief background. I have friends who have studied apologetics, and we have talked about the concept of invincible ignorance. And their belief, they're Catholic, of course, and their belief is that invincible ignorance is a pretty broad concept in that even if people have heard about the Catholic faith, have been Catholic before, have been educated in the faith, that if they reject the faith, then invincible ignorance will apply. And my question broadly is, how broad is invincible ignorance? Okay. I've read several things by not by church fathers, but by, historical things from the popes and stuff like that of days gone by, and they seem to think that it's a very, very narrow window.
Yes. Well, you'd have to almost define narrow there, too. So it could be a narrow window, but it may end up being a broad category. Invincible ignorance means an ignorance that cannot be overcome by due diligence. That would be the technical. In other words, it's a category of reasonableness. Is it reasonable for a person growing up in Thailand among non-Christian believers to suddenly sprout faith in God and Christ? No, are they necessarily going to think that they need to find out about this person Christ who may in their life from time to time come across them, or they may come across? If they hear a Catholic or a Protestant radio program about Jesus and somebody says, believe on the Lord Jesus and be saved, does that imply an obligation on their part? So there's always this question of what is the obligation? And the church is very practical in this matter because there are two kinds of impossibility which can help us describe invincible ignorance. There's physical impossibility, actually never hearing the gospel, actually never hearing the church. And that's important because the church affirmed, as did Pope Benedict when he was prefect under Pope John Paul II in Dominus Jesu, the unicity, in other words, the bond between the church and Christ. You can't have one without the other. So, but there are physical impossibility reasons why a person would be ignorant of Christ, ignorant of Scripture, ignorant of the Gospels, ignorance of the church, ignorance of the claims of the church regarding the papacy, and on and on and on and on. All these things which they simply, they don't live in a place and time where that's available to them. But there's also moral impossibility. And that is, the obstacles are not in the physical realm, like place and time and not being able to do something, but are in the moral realm, or are impinging on the will and inclining the will in a particular way. So imagine the person being raised in an anti-Catholic family. Does that person, because they hear EWTN or some Protestant station or some preacher with a Bible who says to them, unless you believe in Jesus, you can't be saved, is simply the act of hearing them breaking their invincible ignorance. In other words, their ignorance raised in a family that has never fostered in them any kind of religious dimension, or a dimension contrary to Christianity or contrary to the Catholic Church. And the answer is of course, that is a species of invincible ignorance. We've never been able to get through to them because everything in their life has inclined them to the opposite opinion, and they need some remarkable grace or opportunity or something that will break through that. This is why Fulton Sheen said very, very often that people don't turn down or reject the Catholic Church. They reject what they think the Catholic Church stands for, or believes, or has done historically. And we see this all the time. If you listen to The Journey Home, you see this where, and Marcus Grodi himself has spoken on it very many times, that they simply are raised to believe that the Catholics believe that salvation is by works, or that one should worship Mary, or that whatever it is, whatever crazy idea that somebody has about the church that is conveyed to them as children because of the authority of their parents or the authority of their pastor, or today in our secularized world by the authority of their public school teacher who is ridiculing faith and religious belief and practice. All of these things are moral impossibilities for them to overcome. This is why Pope Francis's comment, "Who am I to judge?" is very relevant in anything that involves morality. We do not know the impossibilities of will because of formation, family life, even physical and mental difficulties and so on of persons that keeps them from accepting and living the truth. We simply do not know. That's why God alone will be the judge of those things. And so I think the difficulty of attributing, saying, well, now you know about Jesus, you're responsible. That's a flippant way of approaching other people because it fails to understand the complexity of their formation as human beings, as religious persons, if they're religious, and so on. Now, applying that into the Catholic venue, which is, I think, primarily where you were interested, and that is the issue of fallen away Catholics. All of those factors can apply. The Catholic whose formation in the 1960s or 70s was pathetic, was, to use the coin of the day, fake catechesis, fake news and not good news, that person has obstacles. It's not unsurprising for them not to accept and being convinced of the claims of the church, and to leave it, and then in their zeal to rediscover it and come back. So many converts have done exactly that. They left the church that Fulton Sheen described, the church that they didn't really know what she really believed, and thinking it was less zealous than the the little Protestant church down the street, they went there for some gospel, for some real zeal and truth as they perceived it. But then they discovered the truth about the faith and the church, and they came back, and they have come back, of course, in the millions in the last several decades from exactly that pathway. So we can't judge other people. We continue to witness to them. We continue to relieve their ignorance, where they get to the point, and we will all get there, where we know something is wrong because we're convinced of the truth of something, the truth of Christ, the truth of the church, the truth of the moral law regarding marriage, the truth of the moral law regarding human life. We get to conviction, intellectual conviction regarding the truth of something, and we say no. That's not ignorance at that point. That's moral fault. And with the matter is serious, such as faith and religious practice, it's of grave moral fault. So we can't judge those who left the church. Except this, I would make one other nuance of that, is that if we get to the point of believing the truth of the church and being interiorly convinced of it, and we end up renouncing that, we can't blame God. Grace is always sufficient. That would be an exception, I think. It'd be very hard to know on what basis and what justification a person who has been properly catechized, who has left the church because they finally heard something from the church they didn't like, abortion, divorce and remarriage, whatever it is, and they know the church to be the one Christ established, they know the church to be the one they should die in, and because of some peculiarity of their own moral viewpoint, they were to leave. That would be hard to explain that, because God's grace will be sufficient. Confession is always available. It's that staring the truth and turning your back on it that is the moral culpability in both leaving the church and in many of our other grave moral faults. So it is a broad category, invincible ignorance. We can't judge the sufficiency of knowledge and equate that with to knowing the truth of something. Simply knowing the fact of something is not necessarily knowing the truth of it in this area. But the stickiest case of those who have come to that belief and renounced it and walked away from it. Otherwise, I would say we are generous with people and with their path in this area. Well,
Thank you so much.
Okay, you're very welcome. Thank you, Barbara. Let's go to Becky in Billings, Montana, listening on KJCR. Good afternoon, Becky.
Hi. Thank you so much for taking my call. My question is about medical marijuana and the church's teaching on it. I'm contemplating really looking into it because my 4-year-old daughter has epilepsy, and she also has a tumor in her head. Mm-hmm. And some of the research coming out on medical marijuana is amazing, but I still have a lot of fear about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so is there an actual church teaching on it?
No, it's the general teaching regarding, you could put alcohol in that, alcohol, coffee, anything that has some physiological effect in us. The fifth commandment prohibits that we risk our lives, or that we take our life, or that we take the lives of others. So the moral dimension is the right use of it, the prudent use of something, as it would be for very strong drugs of any kind. I would say in the case of marijuana, there's another element, and that is the civil law. That adds a dimension to it where the law has not approved of some use. The common good suggests that we not break the law for our particular needs and usage. So I think it would depend on two things. what's the law in the state of Montana, and what are the scientists and doctors recommending, and so on. Those are the critical things. If it's not legal, I wouldn't recommend doing it in some place where it is legal. That's sort of puts your good above the good of the common law, of the common good. But I would also say that if it is, then it becomes a medical opinion as to the advantages of this versus other therapies. And typically I would think that that in cases where this is recommended, it's not like recreational use of the drug. It's a therapeutic use of it, and probably therapeutically delivered as well. I don't know if that's what they're suggesting or not, but I think you look at it from those 2 points of view. What the laws say and what is science saying about the comparative merits of this treatment versus other kinds of drugs and things that she might take.
Okay, it's legal in the state, but it's still, illegal in the country.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, you can look at how the federal government is treating that. I think they're being tolerant of some uses, but not of others. The trouble is it's apt to become an illegal business. But I think if you're using medical sources and so on, and within the laws of the state, as opposed to a plant in your backyard or something like that, then I think you're probably not going to be under observation by the federal government. I don't know that that's the case. But it's a difficulty of the situation. I think states would have been better to authorize medical pathways for this and not the recreational pathway. I think it has complicated things. Otherwise, it's just a drug. It's a drug like any other drug that's an opioid or anything like that. Some of our most useful drugs are derived from the opium plant or the coca plant. This is a similar kind of thing, and it can be medicalized. And if that's done, then I think that the moral use of it depends upon the risk and the other moral considerations that you would use in the case of any drug that one is taking. If your doctors are suggesting buy a plant and grow in the backyard and make cookies out of it, I think you should probably consult a lawyer and get advice on that aspect of it. Well, that tower went very quickly, and unsurprisingly here on Open Line. So had a great number of questions today, and next week we'll be back, and I'm assuming Jack will be back too. No commitments, or he won't be back. Maybe not. So we'll see. He's a busy man now, trying to promote the radio, EWTN radio across the country, and doing a very good job of it, as all of our staff here is doing. So thank you for tuning in on this Friday, and I hope you have a nice, almost summer weekend. Until next week, this is Colin Donovan. God bless and goodbye.